Welcome to another edition of Splitting Hairs with Max and Nicky.
I'm Max.
And I'm Nicky.
And together we're Max and Nicky.
On today's episode, we'll be discussing the differences between serialized television and episodic television and why we prefer episodic television overall.
Correct. So, why don't we kick it off? I suppose I prefer I prefer episodic television a bit more because I think it allows...
Well, why don't we, the listeners may not even know what...
Oh, sure. Let's define our terms. As they always say in law, you should define your terms.
Oh my God. How boring can you sound?
Well, not for lawyers. They like that kind of talk.
Well, okay. And I know we do actually have at least one lawyer listening in. Anyway.
Well, he's a diplomat.
Yeah, but he's an actual lawyer. He's got a JD.
Who are we talking about?
And he's passed the bar exam. Anyway,
I got a GED.
Well, actually, he may be a future guest eventually on one of our episodes. But anyway, so serialized television. Serialized television is when there's an arc. There's an arc throughout the whole series or season, and every episode kind of probably will leave you with a cliffhanger,
right?
To get you to watch the next episode.
Every episode is trying to contribute to furthering the arc of the whole series, actually.
The whole series.
Or maybe the season.
Especially the season. I will say the whole arc of the season, actually, not the series, and we'll get into this later, but because sometimes the creators and the showrunners, they don't actually have an idea of how the whole arc of the whole series is going to be.
We'll talk about that as we go on.
They know what the season's going to be like.
We'll talk about that as we go on.
For the season.
And episodic television is where each episode is a self-contained story.
And
the best example...
The problem is presented in that episode, and
it's resolved
by the end of the episode.
Yeah.
And episodic television can have story arcs in them, but usually
that's a little bit of a mix, I suppose, between episodic and serialized. But episodic television, usually
I guess the truest definition.
The truest definition would be something like, give you an example, is like Twilight Zone, where each episode is actually completely different from the next.
Right.
That is to say that sometimes they actually repeated a few of the storylines, but each episode is self-contained. They have nothing to do with another episode. Now, oftentimes, though,
obviously, Twilight Zone is a different kind of
rare
TV
case,
show.
right?
It's not like it has the same characters for the whole series. Seinfeld is a perfect example
of episodic
for the most part. Usually, once in a while, they had the fourth season. There was an arc about them putting on a pilot
for a TV series,
but most of the episodes didn't have to do with that.
Well, no, they did actually have to do that, but you don't. Episodic television is you don't have to watch another episode in order to get involved if you were an outsider who had never seen another episode of that series, and you decided
you can easily jump in.
You can easily just jump in wherever at any point, and you can get into the show. Frasier is like that, or Seinfeld, or MASH is actually another good example.
Yes, those are examples of episodic television series.
Right.
So anyway, we've defined our terms, so let's get into it.
Hold on, just to give some examples of serialized television is...
we
never gave that, but soap operas are a prime example of what
actually
serialized television
pretty much is. A serialized television show is a soap opera,
more or less. No, not necessarily.
I mean, if you're speaking in technical terms, that is basically what a soap opera is a serialized television show. That is true. I looked it up before.
I don't think you're quite right. There's other
this connotation
of what a soap opera is.
The connotation of what a soap opera has become is a little bit different, obviously, than what just a normal serialized television show is. But a lot of most dramas masquerade as proper serialized television shows, when in fact they are all mostly soap operas.
Not most dramas. You're incorrect about that.
No,
There's
sorry.
several episodic, Law and Order.
No. I'm sorry.
Actually episodic.
Most dramatic serialized television shows parade as being serious dramas, when in fact they are, for the large part of them, most of them are soap operas, but they just deal with more serious issues. I mean, Game of Thrones is a soap opera, actually, but it is a serialized television
I
show.
think you're just, I don't know.
Yeah,
I got to look into that myself.
If you really dissect it, it really is kind of...
It has a lot of things shared with soap opera, for sure.
Yes, but it's disguised as just a serious drama series because of the writing. The writing is really good and the acting is really good. And so I think Max, you're kind of making the argument that soap operas are inherently bad in their writing and their acting.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's certain... Basically, you're making the argument that what defines a soap opera is it's being serialized. That's what you're saying.
What?
I said... What you're saying is that what defines a soap opera is the sole fact that it's serialized. That's what you're saying.
Pretty much, yeah.
I got to look into that myself.
Now, soap operas, what we've come to know as what a soap opera is different from just an ordinary serialized series, whether it's drama or comedy, although you don't really ever see serialized comedy series. I mean, sometimes you do. But
yeah, you do. I mean, we're watching one right now, Last Man on Earth. It's a fairly serialized comedy, actually.
That's true. That's very true. I sit corrected because I'm sitting down right now.
Okay.
Anyway, soap operas, whatever. I mean, obviously, Game of Thrones is not of the same ilk as Melrose Place, for example, or even, to another extent, Days of Our Lives. Those are true soap operas. Whereas Game of Thrones, I guess, what separates a show like that, or like a Breaking Bad or something like that, is, I guess, the writing is better and
here's the thing.
acting is better.
I think of Breaking Bad as different from Game of Thrones. And we'll discuss this a bit later, but because, I'm not sure quite. No, I don't quite know the development of the plot.
Max has never seen Breaking Bad.
No, but I'm not quite sure about the writing.
Nicky
that's not what I'm talking about.
Has seen Breaking Bad.
That's not what I'm talking about. Like the process of writing for Breaking Bad. For it's Game of Thrones, they know exactly what they're going to end on. They know how the whole series is going to wind up as.
Yeah. I'm not sure if Vince Gilligan, the creator, knew whether or not how the show was going to end of Breaking Bad. He might have, though.
Which kind of brings us to the point of why we like episodic television. Now, why I like that more is I think the writers have a chance to really focus on something. Usually with television, you don't know when a series is going to end, so the way you develop the plot may be a little frivolous, maybe, or it might be you're not thinking about the whole structure before you actually start creating, and
so
I think that kind of causes
episodic television can focus more on character development. Not saying that character development isn't obviously.
It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's the fact that each episode is self-contained allows them to focus on a structured composition within that episode, with a climax, and you can kind of feel satisfied leaving the show, like leaving the TV set that night, like feeling like, oh, I just accomplished watching basically a play, sort of a small play in a way.
Here's the thing.
That's why they call it teleplays.
Here's the thing
often,
what makes an episodic television show watchable or good is mainly the focus on the characters themselves. I mean, there's more of a not saying that serialized television, obviously there is a lot of character development in that, but I think the sole focus of episodic television is character and character development.
I disagree completely. I think what's cool about episodic television is that you can create content that's based around a specific plot line within that episode. And
but
I think you can create, and it allows...
We're not going to be interested in that plot line unless we're interested in those characters.
That's not true. I'm interested in Twilight Zone all the time.
I think Twilight Zone and shows like that are a little bit of an anomaly. We're not... because most television series have characters that continue throughout the whole series.
That's not true. Seinfeld, the characters don't... they develop...
The characters are the reason why we watch the show.
That's true.
And it's the scenario, it's those particular characters getting into the particular scenarios that are written for them.
I think it's it's the scenarios too is why we watch the show.
But no, it's not just the scenarios. It's the reason, it's the characters that get into those scenarios.
This is still proving my point though. It's many aspects. So there's several components to why I like episodic television more. Yes, you can develop the characters a little bit.
I know, but that's not what I... You're not understanding what I'm saying. Is I'm saying that, I guess maybe I didn't say it correctly before, but episodic television can have a stronger focus on characters because they don't have to worry so much about developing an arc for the series. They can develop creating a sort of memorable character aspects. Or I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not saying that right. But
I don't agree with you actually on that. You can certainly develop a character straight up because something is longer actually. That actually can help you develop the character more.
What?
You can develop a character even more if it's based throughout a longer plot line, a story arc.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
So that's a bad point. That's what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is, I guess I see the point you're trying to make, which is the reason you continue to watch. You're just saying the reason people continue to watch episodic television is because of the characters. Now, I don't think that's 100% correct.
I think that's more accurate to say that than people don't watch soap operas necessarily for the characters, because if you watch something like Melrose Place, the characters, their actions are so frivolous and whimsical that sometimes there's nothing that really grounds these characters except for the actual plot line that revolves around them.
That's not true. I think people... But it's the characters doing those things. Like, for instance, Sydney...
Okay.
What's her name? Sydney
Andrews.
Sydney Andrews in Melrose Place. She's considered by certain standards, she's considered one of the best characters of TV of all time. I don't agree with that particularly.
She's certainly one of the most hated.
Well, no, but people love to hate her.
Annoying.
People love to hate her, actually, and I can get that. Now, also, Kyle MacLachlan in Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks is a soap opera, and his character is one of the best characters of television of all time, in my opinion.
Okay, I don't know what your point is.
I don't know what your point is. You're saying that it's less focused on character development or characters.
Well,
I disagree with that.
That's
completely.
I mean, that's where the terms get a little fuzzy.
In fact,
because I think
that's a trope of soap operas is these different characters that show up all the time.
No, a trope of soap operas also is that a character can easily turn from heel to good and vice versa. I mean,
right.
So it makes their character development less significant, and it makes it points focus more toward the plot development.
Okay, whatever. This isn't my point. I don't even want to get into this argument, actually. The whole point I'm trying to make is, in an episodic TV series, you can actually... what's cool about it is you're developing a plot more focused, actually, and more well thought out, because you know that you have this one episode to do it in, basically.
Well, okay,
hold on.
That's not true.
I'm not going to say, I'm saying that's generally how it works. As we mentioned before in soap operas, they'll change things.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like something like Game of Thrones does seem to be very well thought out because they know where they're heading.
I just said in general.
I know, but
because like in soap operas, usually they're creating these, they don't know, for instance, in TV, they're very erratic as far as cancellations go, and who knows if you will wind up in the next season. And so because it's dependent on these cliffhangers.
That's what makes TV so hard to write, I think, is that you're never sure if you're going to get canceled or not, especially if the ratings aren't very high. You're not sure, and so it really affects the way you're going to write your plot. And so I guess in that sense, episodic television is even better because you don't have to worry about...
I think that's the main argument I'm trying to make is because you're always... Well, maybe not always in the fear. I mean, if you're doing well for the TV show, but you never know what's going to happen, you know? I mean, that's why it makes, you know, something like a soap opera a little bit more, it's not as well thought out. It seems like they keep having to think of ideas to develop the plot, as opposed to thinking about the whole plot before they actually get into the whole production of the episodes, basically. And so I think basically when they're not only that, but just watching Frasier recently, and they're able to focus on several different aspects of the show because they're focusing on just that episode. So they're able to focus on different jokes or comedy that pertain to the development of that plot and the climax of it. And that's really good writing is when they're not just making a joke, but the comedy has to do with the development of the plot, and they're able to focus on the staging really well. I mean, really watching Frasier, it made me realize why I liked it so much is because it seems like small plays basically each time I watch it.
Right, but there are certain things with a lot of those shows, like Frasier, even or Cheers,
where
there are aspects of it that are sort of serialized.
I was going to say there's an overarching.
We know that Niles has always been in love.
Spoiler alert! Just so you never watched Frasier.
But actually, they reveal this from the get-go: is that he is head over heels for Daphne from the moment he lays eyes on her, and that's sort of a theme that goes throughout the whole show. For a large part of the series,
right? And so this is an overarching.
But if you were to just jump in the middle of the TV series, you wouldn't quite understand that.
No, you could,
because you have to know those characters a little bit,
right? Well, you could understand it from a sort of, you can, but you don't necessarily have to. You can still jump in, and it still be a good show.
Sure,
because it is self-contained. So those are the kinds of shows I think are the best. Is basically it's self-contained, but it also has a somewhat of an overarching plot line.
Or sometimes they reference for returning viewers, they reference older episodes. Seinfeld would do that a lot.
Seinfeld would do that, but that's also a TV show where it's extremely episodic, especially since the characters don't actually. The writers have developed them over time, but they actually don't develop as far as becoming better or them learning anything. Each episode is really self-contained.
Their motto was something like "No emotion, no learning." Right?
No hugs, I think, is what they say.
Well, no learning and no emotion. Basically, they didn't like the idea of having anything become dramatic.
There's nothing sentimental about the whole thing. I think that's really cool.
That's what's really cool about Seinfeld is that's probably for a sitcom with regular characters. It's the closest thing you're going to get to something that is completely episodic and not serialized, because there is no real sentimentality involved.
Yeah, although I have to beg to differ. The Cosby Show actually is a really good example of episodic television because there really isn't an overarching
you're
ever.
very right.
And sometimes some episodes have no problem. There's no conflict at all.
I mean,
and it's just about them showing him having a good time, actually. I think that's really cool.
Sort of an arc with the characters sometimes.
Sort of just them growing up.
But
that's all.
It's just about
just them growing up.
That's why it focuses more on the character development. That show, especially.
That show is straight up about character development. Yeah.
It's actually more about the character development of the kids. And just the parents dealing with their kids. Actually, The Cosby Show is it might even be a better example of a truly episodic television series than Seinfeld, because Seinfeld did have those arcs sometimes, with the pilot, or they have a 2-part episode sometimes, like the bottle deposit episode. Anyway, I'm getting a little into If you haven't seen Seinfeld, you wouldn't understand what I'm talking about. But I mean The Cosby Show, I can't think of any episode that really kind of had a direct relation to the previous episode or the next episode.
Well, I mean,
other than character development,
sort of. I mean, like call it, I think you're right. I think it just happens only in one. Like for instance, Lisa Bonet's character, her choosing a college. I think that only happens within that one episode, actually.
Yeah, no, it happens in one episode, and then they move on from that. That's why The Cosby Show is really like a slice of life.
It's like a slice of life type of show.
And I guess a slice of life show is what is an episode is what an episodic show would be. It's like MASH, I guess, is
I was going to say
slice of life.
Well, MASH is a very good another example, but they are dealing with something even a little more serious, which is war,
which is the Korean War. But that's just
they were alluding though to the Vietnam War.
Obviously, that's a backdrop for the series, because the series ran for a lot longer than either the Vietnam War or the Korean War ran for. Well, maybe not the Vietnam War. Maybe ran the length of how long the Vietnam War was, but
what?
From
you're
the
right.
But the point is, it takes place during the Korean War, which was
3 years.
3 years, and MASH ran for
11 years,
a total of 11 years, so it was really just a backdrop for getting into more social commentary and
political commentary too. Actually, I mean, when it started, it was talking about. I mean, as I said, it's thinly veiled as an allusion to the Vietnam War.
But
actually, when it started,
but the Vietnam War ended, and that series kept going. So it was.
But even still, and as Nicky said, even though it's episodic, you grow to really love the characters. Actually, and I mean, by the last episode, I don't want to ruin it for anybody. You really grow attached to those guys.
And
it really becomes it's emotional for the.
That's my point again, where you really focus more on the characters than anything else.
Right. I guess the reason you can focus on the characters more
for episodic
why
television.
You can love them more is because in episodic television, they're going through a myriad of different plot lines and a myriad of different conflicts and problems, and you get to know them better in a way because they have to deal with these different problems, and it's a little more relatable. I'd say
it's more like real life.
It's more like real life.
In real life, you don't necessarily have an arc. To your life, it's just life,
Or you might have an arc, but that's like stretched over a long time. But you have different problems for each
day of your life.
You have different episodes in your life,
Yeah.
I think that's what's cool about The Cosby Show. As you said, it's like a slice of life kind of show, and that is really what it's episodic, and that's what kind of life is like. You have different happenings going on in your life.
Yeah, and
I think that's why
that's a cool thing about. I mean, you brought it up a little bit, but the Cosby Show. Sometimes it would not even have a conflict in the episode.
Right.
It would just really be a slice of life. There was an episode where there wasn't a problem. They were just dancing by the end of the episode. Just the adults were showing the kids how they danced. The kids were showing the adults how they danced. And it was just this kind of
that
episode
happened from a number of times. There was another episode where
it was just comedy in just, in its purest form, in just everyday life.
Well, it's not even just that. It's
Where
just
there
there's
is no
something
conflict.
engaging in seeing people interact. It's just because it's,
Because you like the characters.
you like the characters, yeah. But you like the characters. I mean, anyway. So as I said, soap operas can be very serial. They can be very. It seems like they can be frivolous, or they can be. What's the word I'm looking for? Is have to. Things can change on the spur of the moment, and it seems as though that the plot lines aren't as well thought out. And that's why I'm saying, because episodic television happens within the span of 30 minutes. You can really think about the structure really well of how that works.
So that's what makes serialized television kind of annoying, is that
it's
it is very
manipulative.
It's manipulative. And
it's basically,
I guess the truth is...
Hold on, let me just say one thing. Episodic television, I feel, in general, plays up... in general, there's a lot of bad episodic television too, I should say, but there's something about the fact that they're being unmanipulative in that they're basically playing up to their audience. They're trusting that the audience will come back because of the real merits of the writing and the characters of the show.
Exactly. And serialized television banks on their audiences coming back because of the cliffhanger that they left at the previous episode, at the end of the previous episode. And that's very manipulative.
Give you an example?
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
I'll give you an example because, geez, God, do I get a word in edgewise here?
You keep doing that.
Oh my gosh,
you keep doing
me?
that.
I'm just sitting here. You're talking about.
No
anyway,
way.
Dragon Ball Z.
That's the example you're going to give?
I thought of this earlier today. I know this is like, child's play.
Nerd alert over
here. They
here.
would do this so much.
I've seen every episode myself.
We watched Dragon Ball Z when we were kids, and every day we would look forward to a new episode. And sometimes during the span of that 21 minutes, nothing would happen. And sometimes a small thing by the end of the episode would happen, and you're like, oh, I got to see what happens next. But it was so manipulative. They could have gotten rid of all that extra fluff.
They actually have recently. I think it's called Dragon Ball Kai. I think it's what it's called. They basically shortened the series down to the essentials.
Right, and that's the problem with a lot of
what
serialized...
a nerd I am, huh?
That's the problem with a lot of serialized television, is it's not shortened down to the essentials because a lot of times they
don't know what they're going to write next.
And they don't have anything to write.
Now, another example is Melrose Place. It's really not... it's not like the best made television show of all time. It's addicting as all hell, though. I saw every episode, and because it's
we also saw every episode recently of Beverly Hills 90210.
And I think what's cooler, and I will say Beverly Hills 90210 was better in the first couple seasons because it was a little bit more about them dealing with the problems that arise in high school and
Melrose Place.
Beverly Hills 90210 because it was really more episodic.
It was more episodic than the
and it was
beginning.
more interesting for that reason because it
directed
dealt with different problems.
It was directed differently.
Yeah.
It was less of a soap opera in a way.
It was very much not a soap opera, actually. Well, a little bit, I guess, but not as much, for sure not.
Another, and some people might get mad at this, but I even think something like Breaking Bad, very manipulative. Sometimes some episodes, nothing would happen for...
Don't ruin it for me.
I'm not going to ruin anything, but nothing would happen for the whole span of the episode until the very end, and it would make me so mad that they just wasted an hour of my time. And The Walking Dead is another big example of something that does this a lot, and a series that the creators don't know where they're headed. They just don't know. And it shows. I think a lot of audience members are starting to care less about that TV series because they just keep going through the motions at this point. They keep introducing new villains and stuff like that. And at this point, it's like, okay, give us something new already where, give us some hope that they can get out of this world that's full of corruption and zombies.
Right.
There's never any relief, and that's the problem with soap operas in general, or serialized television for that matter. Is there's never any relief. There's never any downtime where there's just happiness.
So there's no downtime until the very end, basically.
Yeah, and I have a problem with that.
Now, I will say,
I like to be happy and not sad.
It's not just about.
That's why I like comedy series a lot more, like a Seinfeld or Frasier, because those make me happy. And
right, but it's not.
You get a sense of happiness by the end of the episode.
But it's not about being happy or sad. I think it's more about being satisfied. It's being about satisfied with a sort of a conclusion or a resolution at the end of the episode.
Sure.
It's like, okay, what I just watched mattered, actually. There was some significance to what I just watched. And now here's the thing, though. Game of Thrones, though, I think is very different. And you were mentioning that has parallels with soap opera. And you call it a soap opera yourself.
It does.
But however, they do know. And I think they knew from the start how long they were going to go because they know exactly what they were going to do with that series, and that's a little bit different. So they can actually focus on the structure and
they really did take their time with it. I feel like
the writing is very good and the acting is very good.
I feel like the last
too.
season was rushed a little bit, perhaps because it's the first season that kind of veered away from the books because it's surpassed the books at this point. But
right.
I mean, so
it
that
still has some good stuff, though.
Still
that's
some
for sure.
good stuff. But in general, the first 5 seasons really took its time, and they knew what they were doing the whole time. And it's really cool to see how everything in the show matters. Everything is so well put together.
Everything's very well put together.
Because they do know where they're headed.
And it makes you really want to rewatch the episodes, actually.
And because you look back at the first season, you're like, oh, this is really foreshadowing what this.
And they talk about certain specific things that you wouldn't have understood in the first episode until you later watch and you go back and you're like, oh, he said that. And so I think that's a good. So we're playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here. That's an example where serialized television is good.
They still do. But even Game of Thrones is still guilty of manipulating you into watching the next episode.
Oh, I know for sure.
But I will say it's not the cliffhanger at the end of the episode that wants you to watch the next one. It is the whole story arc.
It's the whole story arc.
Which is actually, good, actually. That's
right.
That's a good thing,
Yeah, it's you're right. Right. It is more of like, I guess the story arc.
Because you're sometimes you're bummed out that like, what did we really get from that episode? But sometimes you look back on the episode and you're like, oh, that's what we got, and you didn't realize it at the time.
Well, for instance, I'll give you an example. Is usually episode 9 of the season would have like a big sort of climactic thing happen. An example is the Red Wedding. I won't talk about it for people who haven't seen it, but the episode ends with the Red Wedding, and so it's actually not a cliffhanger. Well, it kind of is in the sense it's like, okay, crap, what's going to happen next? But that's more has to do with, oh crap, what's going to happen next with the rest of the story of this whole series in a way.
Right. It's
as opposed to what's going to happen. Well, I guess it is.
But that's another thing.
That's more of
that
like
happens with soap operas.
That's true. You're right. It is a bit manipulative. Yeah.
It's that and this is happening a lot with drama series now. I notice is these big surprises happen that you just never would have expected.
Well, or is it a surprise?
Well, or is it a surprise
for people? People who haven't watched Game of Thrones.
Big things happen where it's like, oh, this is where the drama is centralized now. Is the fact that there's going to be a big reveal or a big surprise. Sometimes there'll be a death in a series, and actually, in a lot of television series, death seems to be the go-to thing to surprise an audience.
Death becomes her,
or becomes him. It's sort of like this is the big, surprise of the season or something like that, and that's manipulative in and of itself.
No, you're right. Actually, I will say,
and that's a soap opera.
Game of Thrones straight up does that. I mean, not necessarily death is what I'm saying, but just they do cliffhang. They will manipulate you to watch the next episode because
they're like, oh, what are they going to do now?
What are they going to do now?
Not necessarily because of a cliffhanger at the end of the episode, but just because like, oh, now that they've done this thing, how are they going to?
But that is a cliffhanger. That is a cliffhanger. That's what I was trying to make a point of before. Is I guess I was wrong in saying that, what I had said before.
Now there's another series I wanted to mention, which is the X-Files, that really combines the two formats. There is always this overarching plot line. Overarching.
Is it?
I think so. I think you say both. But there's this plot line that runs throughout the series.
Overarching. You're right. No, it's overarching?
Well, don't worry about it.
Maybe it's both.
Don't worry about it. There's this plot line that runs throughout about the government, concealing alien contact and whether or not there's,
life out there.
And Fox Mulder trying to sort of believe in the existence of aliens.
Yeah, that's not really plot line, though.
It is. I don't know if you watched the whole series.
No.
I have seen the whole series. So every few weeks they would address this ongoing plot line. And, that plot line had to do with the smoking man. And there were certain characters within the FBI that they would deal with that dealt with this overarching plot line.
Okay.
Sorry. But most of the episodes were what they termed as Monster of the Week episodes. And those were truly episodic episodes. For lack of a better, they were episodes, self-contained plot lines, and they really dealt with just the characters of Fox Mulder and Dana Scully trying to figure out and solve a case that didn't necessarily have to do with alien life forms, but had to deal with just extraordinary circumstances or weird monsters, actually, just unexplained life forms. And sometimes those could be really funny. And the X-Files is actually a very funny series a lot of the times.
Well, David Duchovny is a very funny actor.
And he's very good. He's very, very funny in that show. And
in the Larry Sanders Show.
To connect Breaking Bad and the X-Files, there was an episode of the X-Files that Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, he wrote the episode, and Bryan Cranston starred in that episode. And that was what I think many believe, and I think this might be true, was that that was kind of how Vince Gilligan, he got to know Bryan Cranston and was always thinking of him for the part of Walter White in Breaking Bad. I know that maybe Matthew Broderick was offered that role at one point in Breaking Bad, but I think there was always this connection with Vince Gilligan and Bryan Cranston, and I think he knew that he wanted to work with him again in the future, because Bryan Cranston in that episode of The X-Files is very good. He's a very good actor, actually. He can play drama. He can play drama and...
and he's very funny, too. I mean, he's in... Seinfeld and Malcolm in the Middle. He's actually really funny in Malcolm in the Middle.
Sure, yeah. I just discovered this by watching the Stephen Colbert Show, that Bryan Cranston actually did some voiceover work for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers when it was brought over to America.
Really? And he's in the movie now.
But
as Zordon, is that his name?
Yeah, as Zordon.
I don't think that voice is as good, though, as the old one.
His he did voiceover work for some of the monsters in the Power Rangers show,
really?
Which is so funny. I mean, and he was a real working actor for a long time, and it's kind of cool to see these guys that have been.
That's a weird thing to say. He's a working actor. I mean, they're all working, but
right. But
he was working to try and get something steady, I guess.
Yeah, but he was always in episodes and of certain shows, and he was he did commercial work and stuff, but he didn't really gain sort of notoriety until
notability. Notoriety has a negative connotation.
Notability. Until he was in Malcolm in the Middle, I guess. So that was his first sort of regular TV series role. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm just going off on a complete tangent. But Bryan Cranston is great. Just wanted to say. Same thing happened to John Hamm, too, Anyway.
Anything more, actually, on episodic versus serialized television? I think we kind of covered all our bases here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in general, we prefer episodic television.
I think I prefer episodic television because really what it comes down to it's a little more like real life, you know?
Well, not for me. It's more like, I watch an episode, and episodic television, I can feel satisfied by the end of the episode.
Yeah, no.
There's a moment of satisfaction.
There's a moment of satisfaction.
Resolution by the end of the episode.
There's a feeling that you want closure. Every time in life, you want some sort of closure, and I feel like that.
In that sense, episodic television is more like sit back and relax and just kind of enjoy the ride, because you know that the ride is going to end by the end of the episode.
Right, and that's the whole point. And really, I guess entertainment is just, escape for a moment from your everyday life. And basically, when you're not allowed to escape, and when the escape becomes too drawn out, that becomes your reality, and that becomes a problem.
But don't get us wrong. We do really enjoy certain serialized television shows.
Twin Peaks is one of my favorite shows of all time.
In my top 5 shows of all time. And I mean, Game of Thrones is just really
I gotta
fun to
say,
watch.
it is maybe a top 20. Is it fair to say top 20 material?
Top 20 material.
Because it really is well done, I will say.
Mad Men.
There are some contrivances, though, I will say.
Breaking Bad Better Call Saul is also very good, and that's a serialized television show. I actually like that more than Breaking Bad. Mad Men actually is an interesting show. Not a serialized TV show.
Not serialized.
People might liken it to a soap opera, but it's not. It's very much a slice of life.
It's very much a slice of life of these,
because they'll introduce these problems that seem to just not get resolved by the next episode. They'll just introduce problems and never resolve them. It's actually
It's a little bit more like real life.
It's
actually,
really,
things don't really.
It's like real life in the
there
sense
are
that
overarching.
Yeah, storylines.
There's a story arc, but it's overarching. Isn't that right?
But because each episode kind of by the next episode they've skipped over to like a couple months later or something like that. It really is like a problem is introduced and you never see the resolution, which is kind of weird because we're talking about wanting to feel some sort of resolution by the end of each episode for an episodic television show. And Mad Men is somewhat of an episodic television show, yet you don't ever get a feeling of resolution by the end of the episode. It's just that's truly slice of life.
Well, no, like there's an episode of Mad Men where they're trying to figure out how to create the ad for a product or something like that. Lucky Cigarettes, wasn't that a famous episode, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of put Mad Men on the map, I think. And the process in which he goes through to try and figure out how to get that perfect ad, that perfect copy. And it's really interesting. And then by the end of the episode, you see why it's such a great series and it's really well written.
Well, that show,
and then I think at
more than most shows, that show really has to do with character development.
It really has to do with character development and just relying on good acting,
character
too.
studies. I mean, the main character.
I think that's another thing about episodic television is it really relies on the actors being good too.
Yes. Soap operas
obviously don't. I mean, that's why people.
You care more about what happens to the character and what happens in the plot than actually watching the character go through those motions.
Right. I think that's why I liken episodic television more to a play, because you're watching this thing you're watching these actors.
You can really
appreciate the acting a little bit more.
But it's not even appreciating the acting; it's appreciating those characters.
Right. No. Yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying.
Do you get what I'm saying? There's a difference between.
Well, no, but it's also the acting. Actors fulfilling those characters.
You see what I'm saying? There's a difference between watching something because you want to know what happens to a character, rather than appreciating what the character's actually doing.
Right. Well, you also care what happens to the characters because you care what happens to the characters.
Because you care about the characters.
Because you care about the characters, as opposed to just caring about the story, like what happens to the characters because of the story, I guess.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right.
But what was I going to say? What were you talking about just a second ago about? What were we just talking about just a second ago?
I don't know. I just don't know.
Right before that, we were talking about some show.
Oh, I don't. Mad Men?
Right, Mad Men. Anyway, I think at the end of the Lucky Strike episode, he comes home to his family. Isn't this like the first episode? It is, I think.
Oh, I don't know. I thought the first episode had to deal with Kodak, but I can't remember.
No, I'm pretty sure the first episode is about him. It's smoking cigarettes because remember he talks to the black guy and he asks him why he likes smoking cigarettes. I think why he likes Lucky Strike or the particular brand of cigarette that he likes, and he's like, "Why do you keep going back to the cigarettes?" And he, and over the course of the episode, he's trying to figure out his process, and then towards maybe 3/4 of the way through, you see that he has this other life outside the ad agency where he meets, this woman that he's interested in Greenwich Village, and that's another aspect of the show that you might see develop later on. And then at the very end of the episode, you see him come home to his family that he has with his wife, and so that woman was his mistress before, and that kind of leaves you. It has a little bit of an interesting cliffhanger. Not really. It's more like
it's really a great episode.
Let's see how this character develops, based on the situations he's in, and it has a little bit of a cliffhanger in the sense you're like, okay, this is an interesting character, I suppose,
No, exactly.
And his situation is interesting, but it's not necessarily about
mainly a character study of John Draper. I mean, there are other characters that are important in that show, but he's the main character, and we really delve into his personal life, his past, and we really we really study this character. And
right. I mean, it is definitely character study kind of thing. But there are small bits of it that have elements. As we said, it has sort of overarching kind of elements, for the whole series.
But real quickly before we end the episode, just I'm going to recommend you watch certain episodic shows just because you'll get a better understanding of what we're talking about. Go see The Cosby Show if you haven't seen it. Watch Family Ties if you haven't seen it, because that really deals with a problem each episode.
Watch MASH.
And
by the way, just so you know, Nicky was mentioning X-Files and Monster of the Week episodes, and how maybe the directing style is different in each of the episodes. And I think that's something that episodic television can do, is that they can create an episode that is unlike other episodes, and it's still being okay with the whole series, in the long run,
Right. Although I will say Buffy the
Vampire Slayer has a musical episode,
Right.
And that's
people love that episode, but even though that episode's really cheesy, in my opinion, the best episode of that TV series is The Body, because
but that's also unlike every episode.
It is, and it's the only episode that's truly not cheesy. Because most of that show is cheesy. It is a guilty pleasure. I have seen every episode.
Just so you know, there's an episode of MASH where they set a timer clock.
Well, wait, let me finish my thought.
Oh, sorry.
But the Body episode is really cool because there is no music and there's very little dialogue. And
that's another episode. Another episode we should talk about is just music in film, as opposed to music
and in television.
And in television,
that's what makes a show like 30 Rock cheesy, is the music.
Yeah, but that's another episode,
because that show could be funny,
right?
But it's this distracting music,
and
it's cheesy music that makes you not like the.
I'm watching Frasier, and the only music that happens in the show, except for maybe the occasional montage, they might use music, but basically the only times they have music are in the very beginning and the very end of the show. And we'll get that's a great episode to talk about that kind of stuff. I think,
right.
The useful ways in using music and
the distracting ways.
And the distracting ways that often happen. Anyway, the final word. Oh, I just want to say there's a MASH episode where there's a timer they have on one episode, and they have to before this man dies, they have to do this surgery that happens. And I think they have to do some sort of heart surgery, and they have to do it under a certain amount of time. And the whole episode is ticking away. They have to get it done within a certain amount of time. And
I mean, Max just like gestured a hand ticking on a clock, and it was just such a weird thing where,
well, in any event,
I mean, you had to see it. It was just a weird thing.
In any event, you're less likely to see that kind of thing happen in a serialized television show because somehow, you know, it might be too distracting of a thing to happen in order for them to, they need to create some sort of ongoing movement in the plot line somehow. And so it might be too distracting for an episode to have that kind of thing happen.
Right.
I feel like you're more likely to see that kind of thing happen in episodic television. Anyway,
any other shows you want to mention?
Oh, so MASH, Frasier, definitely go watch Frasier. It is the jam. It is the real
material.
jam, you know.
Cheers.
Although Seinfeld, of course, we mentioned.
Seinfeld and, you know,
I know we're mentioning a lot of comedies just because we love comedies.
Comedies tend to be episodic.
So MASH can be very serious at times, for sure. Mad Men. We mentioned that before.
Yeah, Mad Men.
X-Files.
I mean, you know, the X-Files. Yeah, I mean.
Well, anyway, you know, we don't have to.
The Simpsons is a perfect. I don't even know why we never talked about the Simpsons.
I was gonna say, but you interrupted me earlier. The Simpsons is another great example where basically what's cool about
the characters make that show.
The characters definitely make that show, especially the voices and the actors that are voicing them. And what's interesting about that show
is...
The
animation, too, is, like, very important. That's what makes the, like, 1992 to 1990...
yeah.
That's what makes, like, 1992 to 1998 the best years of that show is the animation.
Another episode to talk about is just animation and the development of animation and how computers got involved and
made
it not as funny, I would say.
That made the animation not as nuanced and subtle. That's a whole other episode.
It's a whole other episode.
But, you know, I will say...
But that is truly episodic because... Really,
those mid-90s episodes of The Simpsons is one of the best TV series of all time.
I mean, for one thing, they're always the same age, which is a funny thing. Another thing is, it's really episodic because they really don't have to talk about you can just go straight into any episode and not have to think about another episode.
You really don't.
That's a real perfect example of episodic television.
I actually can't really think of any instances where they even reference an episode prior.
No, I mean they do. The characters will reference,
characters, I guess,
for straight up.
I guess, I mean, I don't know if you get into
like
the latest
Flanders, has in Maud dies, you know, and
I
so
mean,
like,
I guess. I mean, spoiler alert.
I mean, that's not something. See, that's another thing is. Us saying that there's a spoiler on that doesn't really matter. See, that's the problem. Another problem with serialized television is everyone has to worry so much about spoilers. You know, I hate that. It's like you can't even go on the internet to see about the show because there's some sort of spoiler about it. And what's cool about episodic television is somebody could spoil maybe one episode for you, but that's not going to spoil the whole series
also,
for you.
You're not going to even like...
And it's not that significant.
Even if they spoiled something, it's like you're going to watch it anyway because...
It's not a significant thing for the whole storyline of the whole show.
I feel like you watch an episodic show... I mean, you obviously...
You're really watching it based on the content of that show, you know,
right? You don't care necessarily
the quality. I should say, based on the quality of the content of the show,
right?
Not based on the.
You don't care necessarily how it might end. I mean, you do when you're watching it.
You do want to. I mean, of course, it's like a movie. You don't want it to end. You don't want to be spoiled, or you don't want it to be spoiled. But definitely, it's that is a good thing about episodic television.
I mean, that is a weird thing that you're saying because like movies are, like 2-hour TV shows. I mean, sort of. I mean, you don't want anybody to ruin a movie for you.
I just said that.
Right.
I was saying that, I'm not completely right in what I just said.
Well, I will say the difference is that in a TV series, an episodic television series, you already know the characters. And you know that one episode is not going to
It's not going to make or break the next episode for you.
But a movie is different because
it's
the
just
whole
one thing
ends.
Yeah.
It's
basically
there's
a lot of television the way it is now, which it was just serialized, is basically they're trying to make it's like a 10-part movie basically, or something like that. And it's basically like, I guess I can't talk about this with anybody unless I've seen that episode, and it's like, it's just kind of annoying,
Yeah. And
right now, I don't want Nicky to spoil Breaking Bad any episodes because I feel like it's just going to spoil something about the series for me or something,
I mean, he should really get on watching that at this point.
But, it's a good show. I think people should get on watching MASH, and that's been years.
Sure, yeah. But you know what?
But
that's episodic, and
exactly.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
See, if I talk about Seinfeld to somebody...
but I also...
Max, let me finish my thought. Let me finish my thought. If I talk about Seinfeld to somebody and I mention something that happens in an episode, it'll intrigue them to want to watch that show rather than them getting annoyed that I'm ruining something. It'll be more like, oh, wow, what else can I get from this show,
Right, and plus they won't fully appreciate what we're talking about unless they watch the episode, too.
Right.
Now, there are things also in MASH, though, that do happen and that are kind of... that can be very sad, and that's something I don't want to spoil for people.
Sure, you don't want those, because
those particular episodes are very touching, and it's like, by me telling you what happens, it's within the context of one episode, something might happen important, and I don't want to ruin that for anybody. So anyway, the final word is...
every episode you always say the final word is...
Well, I like to say that. It's like my thing. I kind of want to say it. So the final word is episodic television, I think, in general, just has a lot of better qualities to it
than serialized
television.
Even though there are some serialized television shows that are truly great.
And that are some of our favorite shows.
But even those favorite shows can be very manipulative because they are serialized.
Right.
Episodic television, in general, it's the way to go.
I think in general, it's the way to go.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Splitting Hairs with Max and Nicky.
And listen in next time.